If you ever want to see how quickly life can shift from ordinary to unforgettable, spend a morning at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport. Even before dawn, the air inside Terminal B buzzes with the low hum of rolling luggage, sharp voices over the PA, and the metallic scent of too strong coffee. For Jake Turner, every day started like this. A veteran airport security officer in his early 40s, Jake moved through the crowds with steady authority, his badge glinting beneath the harsh fluorescent lights. But Jake was never alone on his rounds. By his side, padding quietly and watchful, was Rex, a grizzled German shepherd whose muzzle had gone almost white with age. To passengers, Rex was just another K-9 unit, but to Jake, he was family, a partner who'd saved him more times than he could count. Their bond ran deep, built on years of night shifts and the silent trust born from shared danger. That morning, though, something felt off. The heat outside pressed against the glass walls, making the air inside thick and restless. Jake sipped his coffee, listening to Rex's nails clicking against the polished floor as they passed a line of sleepy travelers. The radio crackled on Jake's belt, static punctuated by the bored dispatcher's voice. Then Rex stopped, just froze, mid-step, ears pricked, his whole body taut as a drawn wire. Jake followed his gaze, a pile of luggage stacked awkwardly near a row of payphones, ignored by the cleaning crew. There was nothing unusual at first glance. A battered red suitcase, a child's purple backpack, a heavy black duffel. But Rex's hackles were up, and he let out a low, guttural growl that rumbled through his chest. Jake frowned. Rex never growled unless something was seriously wrong. Suddenly, Rex lunged forward, dragging Jake toward the luggage. People nearby glanced up, startled, but Jake waved them back. Rex sniffed frantically at the duffel, then clawed at the red suitcase. And for the briefest second, Jake could have sworn he saw tears in Rex's dark eyes, glistening as the dog barked and dug at the heavy bag. It wasn't fear. Jake had seen enough dogs to know fear, but something rawer, deeper. Jake's hands trembled as he pulled the suitcase from the pile. The zipper was half broken, the fabric stained. He fumbled with the latch, adrenaline roaring in his ears. The next moment, time seemed to splinter. Inside, curled up between crumpled clothes, was a little girl. Her hair was tangled, her lips tinged blue, her eyes wide with panic. She was barely breathing, each breath so shallow it barely moved her chest. Jake's training kicked in. He called for medical backup, cradled the girl gently, whispered soft words to keep her conscious. Rex pressed close, licking her hand, whining with an urgency that cut through the commotion. The airport staff, hardened to chaos, gathered around, faces pale with shock. A janitor wiped at his cheeks, fighting tears. In that moment, all the noise of the terminal faded. There was only the terrified girl, the old dog who'd found her, and Jake's heart pounding like thunder. Someone tried to shoo Rex away, but Jake stopped them. "He's with me. He stays," Jake said, his voice steely. Rex sat at attention, eyes locked on the child, as if he could anchor her to life by sheer will. Minutes later, EMTs arrived, sweeping the girl onto a stretcher. Jake watched, his hands shaking as they checked her vitals. She clung to Rex's fur, refusing to let go until the last possible second. When the paramedics pried her free, Rex whimpered and Jake swallowed hard, fighting a tide of helplessness. He felt useless, a bystander in the worst moment of a child's life. As they wheeled the girl away, Jake noticed something that made his blood run cold. Stuck to the suitcase's handle was a bright sticker, a smiling cartoon heart, and the word charity in looping script. It looked innocent, friendly. But Jake remembered last month. A different lost child, a different sticker, a similar suitcase abandoned in a bathroom stall. He'd written it off as coincidence, just another oddity in an airport full of them. Now doubt gnawed at him. He knelt beside Rex, stroking the old dog's head, trying to still his racing thoughts. "Good job, buddy," he murmured. Rex looked up at him, tired but resolute. For the first time, Jake felt a chill settle deep in his bones. This wasn't an isolated event. Something darker lurked beneath the surface, and Rex had sensed it long before anyone else. In the hours that followed, the story of the rescue raced through the airport like wildfire. Jake's supervisor shook his hand. Airport staff patted Rex's head. Even strangers stopped to thank them. But Jake couldn't shake the image of the girl's tiny hand gripping Rex's fur, her silent, desperate plea for safety. As dusk settled and the crowds thinned, Jake stood by the windows, staring out at the runway lights. He knew one thing for certain. Whatever shadow haunted the terminal, he and Rex had only just scratched the surface. And somewhere in the depths of the terminal, beneath the neon lights and endless announcements, the truth waited to be found. The day after the rescue, Jake barely slept. Images of the little girl haunted his dreams. Her eyes wide with fear, the frantic way she'd clung to Rex, the charity sticker flashing like a warning in his mind. When his alarm blared at 4:30 a.m., he was already awake, sitting on the edge of the bed, rubbing his temples. His wife, Anne, murmured something and turned over, but Jake barely heard her. The case had sunk its claws into him. At the station, the mood had shifted. Officers who usually joked over morning coffee greeted Jake with subdued nods, a hint of respect in their eyes. But Jake's mind was elsewhere. He watched Rex, who paced the squad room restlessly, sniffing corners and door frames, tail held low. The dog's unease unsettled Jake more than he cared to admit. By mid-morning, word had spread far beyond the airport. News vans clustered outside, and reporters peppered anyone in uniform with questions. Jake managed to dodge the cameras, slipping out with Rex to walk the concourse. They moved through the crowds, Jake's eyes scanning for anything out of place, Rex's nose twitching with every step. But Rex wasn't acting like himself. He stopped abruptly at a forgotten scarf near the lost and found, just a cheap, polka-dotted thing, crumpled and dusty. But as Jake reached for it, Rex whimpered, pressing his snout into Jake's hand. The sound was so soft, so heartbreakingly human, that Jake's chest tightened. He knelt, running a comforting hand down Rex's back. "It's okay, boy. We're here," he whispered, though he wasn't sure if he was reassuring the dog or himself. As they continued, Jake found his thoughts drifting back to his childhood, a memory he'd spent years trying to bury. He was 10 when his little sister vanished. One moment she was playing hopscotch outside their apartment in Savannah. The next, she was gone. No note, no sign, just a red ribbon fluttering on the curb. His family had fractured after that. His parents divorced, grief eating them alive. Jake had grown up fast, learning that the world could change in the blink of an eye. He'd joined law enforcement because he'd wanted to protect people, to stop what happened to his family from happening to someone else. But after all these years, the pain lingered. A dull ache that flared in moments like this, when another child's life was hanging in the balance. A voice crackled over his radio, yanking him back to the present. "Turner, come to Security Office A. Got something you'll want to see." Jake clipped the radio back on his belt and hustled down the corridor, Rex at his side. Inside the security office, Agent McLean was hunched over a bank of monitors, rewinding security footage. "Check this out," he said, gesturing for Jake to watch. The grainy video showed the area near the lost and found. Jake leaned in, heart pounding. A woman in a neon vest walked by, a little boy trailing behind her. They stopped near the luggage pile, the same one where Jake and Rex had found the girl. The woman glanced around, left a bag, then took the boy's hand and disappeared out of frame. McLean paused the footage. "That's the third kid this month who's vanished near Terminal B," he said quietly. "And every time, there's a bag left behind with a charity sticker." Jake's blood ran cold. "You think it's the same group?" "I don't know," McLean said, "but it's getting worse. Parents say their kids just disappeared." Jake stared at the screen, jaw clenched. He replayed the video, looking for any clue he'd missed. Meanwhile, Rex sat by the door, whining softly, eyes never leaving the screen. Jake's heart twisted. Rex's instincts were razor sharp. He'd trusted them before, and he'd trust them now. Outside, the terminal bustled with oblivious travelers. Jake led Rex through the quieter halls, their footsteps echoing off the walls. He tried to piece together what he knew: missing kids, abandoned bags, charity stickers. It wasn't enough. There had to be something he was missing. They stopped at the information desk, where Pam, an older employee with a quick smile, waved them over. "You two all right?" she asked, concern in her eyes. Jake nodded, but Pam wasn't fooled. "That dog of yours, he's been restless for weeks. Sometimes he just sits by the lost luggage like he's waiting for something. Last Tuesday, he refused to leave until a custodian finally moved an old suitcase." Jake's pulse quickened. "Did you see anything strange? Anyone hanging around?" Pam hesitated, biting her lip. "Now that you mention it, there was a woman in a bright jacket kept looking over her shoulder, and a man, tall, gray hair, always on his phone. They weren't traveling, just watching." Jake thanked her and made a note in his phone. As they walked away, Rex suddenly darted forward, nearly pulling Jake off his feet. He led Jake to a trash can, sniffed intently, then barked. Inside, beneath some crumpled newspapers, was a child's tiny sneaker. Jake's hands shook as he fished it out. He glanced at Rex, whose eyes shone with something like sorrow. Jake understood that feeling too well. Back in the break room, Jake sat heavily on a battered couch. Rex jumped up beside him, laying his head in Jake's lap. For a moment, the world shrank to just the two of them, bonded by old wounds and shared purpose. The airport lights flickered overhead, casting long shadows across the linoleum. As Jake stroked Rex's fur, he made a silent vow. He wouldn't let another child slip through the cracks, not if he could help it. And he knew, deep down, that Rex would lead him wherever this trail of heartbreak ended. But as the clock ticked toward evening and the sun slipped behind the clouds, Jake had no idea just how dangerous the hunt would become. The airport was always busiest during the day, but it was the quiet corners at night that pressed hardest on Jake's nerves. Shadows gathered where the fluorescent lights couldn't quite reach. Jake walked those stretches with Rex, their steps echoing through the cavernous, half-lit halls. Travelers came and went, lives intersecting for brief, anonymous moments, but Jake had become obsessed with the faces that vanished. Faces of children lost somewhere between baggage claim and the endless runways. His supervisor, Captain Daniels, insisted Jake was overreacting. "You're burned out, Turner. Take a few days off. The dog, too. We found the girl, right? You did your job. Don't chase ghosts." But Jake saw the way the captain avoided his eyes. how the unease lingered even after the official statements were made. The truth was, the whole airport felt off. The hum of machinery, the distant PA announcements, the cold draft from the tunnels. Everything seemed to whisper that something terrible was happening right under their noses. Rex had changed, too. The old dog's limp had gotten worse. He seemed to be aging in real time, gray hairs spreading across his coat like frost. Some nights, Jake caught him staring down dark passageways, ears perked, tail rigid, as if he sensed something Jake never could. Sometimes Jake wondered if Rex missed the kids he'd never gotten to save, or if, in his own way, he mourned for Jake's little sister, too. Jake's marriage was fraying at the seams. Anne, who had always been his anchor, was growing impatient with his late hours and sleepless nights. She called him from home, her voice thin with worry. "Jake, you can't save everyone. Please come home before this eats you alive." He'd promise her he would, knowing he was lying. He'd spend hours in the break room, Rex's big head resting on his lap, silence heavy between them. Sometimes Jake would scroll through the database of missing children, faces blurring together. He saw his sister in all of them, wide-eyed, hopeful, snatched away in a moment. Jake grew paranoid. He carried stacks of security footage home, spending his nights in front of the TV, scribbling notes, marking timestamps. It wasn't healthy. He knew that. But every time he closed his eyes, he saw the terrified girl in the suitcase, her tiny fingers gripping Rex's fur, pleading for help. It felt like the world was daring him to look away. One especially quiet night, Jake and Rex patrolled Terminal D. The crowds had thinned to a trickle. Only a handful of red-eyed travelers and the cleaning crew remained. Jake paused at a window overlooking the runway, watching the blinking lights in the darkness. "You ever get the feeling everyone's missing something, boy?" he asked. Rex huffed, laying down with a heavy sigh. Jake was so lost in thought he almost missed the soft sound, a whimper so faint it barely rose above the hum of the vents. He followed it down a deserted hallway, Rex pressing close to his side. They found a little boy crouched behind a row of vending machines, his cheeks stained with tears. "I got lost," the boy sniffled, clutching a faded action figure. Jake knelt beside him, gentle. "You're safe now. We'll get you back to your folks." He radioed for assistance, staying with the boy until his frantic parents arrived, hugging him like they'd never let go. As he watched the reunion, Jake felt both hope and heartbreak. For every child found, how many slipped away unnoticed? He couldn't shake the feeling that these accidents weren't random. Something linked them, a pattern only Rex seemed to sense. The more he dug, the more the pieces refused to fit. Back in the break room, Jake slumped in a battered armchair, exhaustion settling deep in his bones. Rex curled up at his feet, his breathing slow and even. Jake stroked the dog's ears, comforted by the old dog's steady presence. "I don't know if we're getting any closer," Jake whispered. Rex opened one eye, thumped his tail, as if to say, "We're not alone in this." Jake's mind wandered to his sister's case. He'd spent years poring over every scrap of evidence, every interview, every dead end. It had driven his family apart. His father drank, his mother retreated into silence, and Jake turned his pain into obsession. The world kept spinning, but the hole in his heart never closed. He knew, deep down, that the airport's ghosts wouldn't rest until the truth came out. But with every new shift, the pressure built. Daniels ordered Jake to stop investigating. "Let it go, Turner. You're making the other officers nervous." But Jake couldn't. Not when Rex whimpered in his sleep. Not when the terminal lights flickered like Morse code warnings. Not when another child's face flashed across a missing poster taped to a kiosk. He grew reckless, taking risks, checking unauthorized areas, asking pointed questions, recording conversations with the baggage handlers and janitors. He started to sense resistance. Employees became tight-lipped. One janitor, usually friendly, wouldn't meet Jake's gaze. "Sometimes it's better not to ask too much," the man muttered, pushing his mop down the hall. Jake's marriage strained further. Anne left him a note one morning. "I love you, but I can't compete with your ghosts." He found Rex waiting by the door, leash in his mouth, as if begging Jake not to give up. The days blurred together. Jake's eyes burned from lack of sleep. His temper grew short. But through it all, Rex remained his constant. In the silent hours before dawn, the two of them would patrol the terminal, a man and his dog, united by grief and stubborn hope. And as Jake stared into the security monitors, watching strangers drift through the shadows, he whispered a promise to the empty terminal, to his sister, to the lost children, and to Rex. "I will not let you disappear." The days blurred together, each one heavier than the last. Jake felt it most in his bones, in the hollows under his eyes, in the slow, deliberate way Rex moved now. For every life the dog had helped save, it seemed the weight of the ones they couldn't hung in the air between them, silent but suffocating. Word had spread through the airport. Jake Turner was obsessed. Some whispered that grief had finally caught up with him. His supervisor, Captain Daniels, didn't mince words during their next meeting. "You need to stand down, Turner. Take some leave. This thing with the lost kids. Let it go." But Jake couldn't. He'd given up too much already. His family, his peace of mind. He wasn't about to walk away now. Not when Rex still whined every time they passed the lost luggage area. Not when every charity sticker sent a chill up his spine. Rex's own anxiety grew more obvious by the day. He paced the corners of their apartment at night, sniffing old chew toys, refusing the treats he'd once devoured with gusto. Some nights he'd press his nose against the door, tail drooping, like he was waiting for someone who'd never come home. One particularly rough morning, Jake found Rex lying listless on the living room rug, his breathing shallow, his brown eyes dull with worry. Jake sat beside him, brushing his fingers through Rex's coarse fur, remembering when the dog was just a pup, fearless, always first out the door, ears perked, tail wagging like a flag. Now the years and the memories weighed them both down. That afternoon, Jake broke down and called the one person he knew would understand: Maria Chen. Maria worked TSA, sharp-eyed and steady under pressure, but beneath her tough exterior, she carried her own silent ache. Years ago, her daughter disappeared in an airport just like this one, gone in the time it took to answer a phone call. Her case had never been solved. Maria had poured herself into her work, just like Jake, chasing closure she knew might never come. Jake met Maria in the staff lounge, Rex at his side, their grief visible in the lines on their faces. Maria handed Rex a new chew toy, a battered, squeaky bone. To Jake's surprise, Rex's tail thumped once, twice, a flicker of his old self. "See?" Maria smiled softly. "He's tougher than he looks." Jake tried to smile back, but his voice cracked when he spoke. "I can't let it go, Maria. Every time I try, it's like something's clawing at me. The girl we found, she could have been anyone's daughter. She could have been—" He stopped himself, unable to finish. Maria nodded. "Grief isn't something you put away in a box. Some of us just learn to carry it better. She sat beside him, her voice steady. But we can't let it destroy us. We have to use it. Maybe that's how we find peace. They sat together in the stillness, Rex lying with his head in Maria's lap. For the first time in weeks, Jake felt less alone. Maria pulled out her phone, scrolling through a series of photos she'd collected over the years. Images of missing children, places, stickers, people who'd seemed out of place. "Look," she whispered, pointing to a picture. Every one of these kids disappeared near secure baggage areas. Every time a charity sticker was involved. Jake's heart raced as he studied the photos, the pattern too precise to be coincidence. "Who has access to those areas?" he asked, voice tight. "Mostly staff, a few approved vendors, and one charity group." Maria pulled up a website. The organization was headed by Dr. Evelyn Grant, a respected child psychologist. She ran airport workshops, provided support for children traveling alone. On the surface, everything looked legitimate, until Maria tapped a button, revealing a list of names connected to the charity. A few sent Jake's pulse skyrocketing, employees he'd seen around, volunteers who always lingered near lost children. The weight in Jake's chest grew heavier, but something else flared: determination. He and Maria decided to dig deeper, unofficially. They started shadowing the charity's volunteers, blending into the background as travelers hurried by. Maria used her TSA credentials to slip into secured areas. Jake logged extra hours, poring over security tapes, making lists, mapping out times and places. Late one night, after hours of searching, they finally found something. A shipment log with signatures that didn't match employee records, and a forged security badge tucked into the back of a lost and found drawer. Every detail pointed to the same organization. The risk grew with every step, but Jake didn't care. He'd spent too many years running from grief. Now, with Maria at his side, he was ready to face it head-on. Rex seemed to sense the shift, his anxiety giving way to cautious hope. When Maria handed him another toy the next day, he barked. A deep, rumbling sound that echoed through the lounge, making Jake laugh for the first time in weeks. Maria smiled. "Told you, he's still got fight left." Jake felt it too, the smallest spark, the faintest glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, they could make a difference. The grief wasn't gone. It never would be. But with Maria's help, Jake realized he didn't have to carry it alone. As the airport lights flickered on for another restless night, Jake, Rex, and Maria braced themselves for the next step. The weight of grief would always be there, but for the first time, Jake was ready to turn it into something that mattered. The pace of their days quickened, tension buzzing in the air like static before a storm. Jake and Maria had made a pact, no more waiting for permission. Every moment they wasted was another chance for a child to vanish, another family to be shattered. Jake had always played by the rules, but now, rules felt like a luxury he could no longer afford. They started staying late, blending in with the evening cleaning crew, ducking into side corridors when supervisors walked past. Rex, who had sensed the change in Jake's spirit, was more alert than ever. Even in his old age, the dog's focus sharpened with each new lead. It was as if the air itself carried whispers only he could hear. One night, just before midnight, Maria called Jake in a hushed, urgent tone. "I got something. You need to see this." Jake met her outside the admin offices, heart hammering in his chest. The building was nearly deserted, only the buzz of vending machines and the far-off hum of escalators filling the silence. Maria's hands shook as she handed him a printout. Shipping manifests, forged signatures, names that didn't match any official roster. "Look at these dates," she whispered. "Every missing child, every charity delivery. It's all here. They've been moving kids through the airport, hiding them in plain sight." Jake's jaw clenched. How the hell did nobody catch this? Maria gave him a look that said everything, because nobody wanted to. They slipped into the restricted offices, hearts pounding, careful to avoid the motion sensors Maria had mapped out after years on the job. Rex stayed glued to Jake's hip, his ears perked, nose twitching. He led them down a narrow hallway, stopping in front of an unmarked door Jake had always assumed was a utility closet. Maria picked the lock with hands steady from 1,000 TSA pat-downs. The door swung open, revealing a small, windowless room. Stacks of file boxes filled the shelves, and in one corner, an old computer screen glowed faintly. Rex immediately padded over to a dusty pile of paperwork and began to sniff, circling until he stopped dead in his tracks. He let out a low, guttural growl, the sound vibrating in the small space. Jake stepped over and knelt, shuffling through the documents. His breath caught in his throat. A thick folder marked Adoptions, filled with forms and photos, each stamped with Dr. Evelyn Grant's charity logo. Jake's hands shook as he leafed through pictures of children, most of them wide-eyed, uncertain, some with bruises or bandages. There were letters, fake medical clearances, even forged passports. In the center of it all was a family photo, Dr. Grant, smiling beside two unfamiliar men. Rex growled louder, hackles rising. It was an instinct Jake had learned to trust above all else. Sometimes it took a dog to see the truth that people missed, especially when that truth hid behind a practiced smile. Suddenly, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed down the hall. Maria tensed, and Jake shoved the documents into his bag, flipping off the computer. They ducked into a janitor's closet as two security officers passed by, muttering about midnight audits and keeping things quiet. Jake held his breath. Rex pressed against his leg, Maria's eyes locked on the door handle. When the footsteps faded, they slipped out and backtracked through the staff exit, adrenaline pulsing hot in their veins. Only when they reached the loading dock did Jake finally exhale, sweat trickling down his spine. "We need to go to Daniel's," Maria whispered. This is a trafficking ring, and it's been running for years." Jake nodded, heart pounding, but in his gut, he knew what would happen. Daniels would call it in, but word would leak, evidence might disappear. Still, they had to try. The confrontation was explosive. Jake stormed into his supervisor's office, Maria close behind. He dropped the folder onto Daniels's desk, every muscle in his body coiled with frustration. "You told me to stop. You told me I was seeing ghosts. Well, here's your proof. This is bigger than you thought. Bigger than any of us." Daniels scanned the documents, face blanching as he realized the scale of what lay before him. "Turner, you have no idea what kind of trouble you're in. You accessed restricted areas without authorization, broke into locked offices." Jake cut him off. "We did what we had to do. How many kids have to go missing before you act? If you suspend me, I'll take this to the FBI myself." Rex stepped forward, muscles tensed, standing protectively in front of Jake. His growl was soft, but fierce, a living wall between Jake and anyone who might try to silence him. Daniels looked at the dog, at Jake, at the mountain of evidence. His shoulders sagged with the realization that this was beyond his ability to contain. "Go home," Daniels said finally. "I'll call in the feds. But Turner, you're done here until further notice." Jake nodded stiffly, rage and relief mingling inside him. He'd pushed as far as he could within the system. Now it was out of his hands. Maria squeezed his arm. "You did the right thing," she murmured, her eyes glinting with hope and fear. As they left the office, Jake glanced down at Rex, who looked up at him with unwavering loyalty. "You saved them, old boy," Jake whispered, voice thick. "You saw what none of us could." That night, Jake didn't sleep. He sat by Rex, sifting through the faces in the folder, the weight of responsibility pressing harder than ever. For the first time, though, he believed that justice, real, unstoppable justice, was finally on its way. The next 48 hours passed in a blur of anxiety and defiance. Jake knew he was gambling everything: his career, his reputation, maybe even his freedom. But the truth burned in his veins, a fire he couldn't put out. Maria was equally relentless. Their late-night call to Special Agent Carter, an old friend of Maria's in the FBI, set events into motion that neither could slow or control. Carter listened in silence as they presented their evidence. He was tall, all business, but his eyes softened when he looked at Rex. "You've done the right thing," Carter said at last, "but you need to keep your heads down. These people, if they realize we're onto them, they won't hesitate to protect themselves." The warning lingered in the air, weighty and real. Jake tried to return to some semblance of normalcy, but normal was gone. At home, his phone rang with unknown numbers, hang-ups, static. The sense of being watched was constant. He pulled the blinds tighter, double-checked the locks, kept his service pistol within arm's reach. Anne noticed the tension, the way Jake hovered near windows, the haunted look in his eyes. She tried to get him to talk, but he just shook his head, promising it would all be over soon. She didn't press, but she left the porch light on every night. Maria became a shadow, moving quietly through the airport, blending in as she watched the comings and goings of the charities people. She started wearing her hair up, using different routes to her car, never parking in the same spot 2 days in a row. Still, the sense of danger tightened around her like a noose. The threats grew less subtle. One night, Jake came home to find Rex's kennel broken into, the latch bent. Rex was inside, trembling and panting, a sticky residue smeared on the floor. Jake's gut twisted. He rushed Rex to the vet, adrenaline singing in his ears. "Poison bait," the vet said, her voice grim. "But you got to him in time. He's lucky. And tough." Jake wept as he sat beside Rex in the exam room, stroking the dog's head, promising him, again, that he'd never let anything happen to him. "You're not just a dog," Jake whispered, his voice hoarse. "You're my partner, my family. I'm sorry I brought this to our door." Meanwhile, Maria was nearly run off the road one evening by a black sedan that appeared out of nowhere, headlights glaring in her rearview mirror. She made a sharp turn into an empty gas station, heart pounding, as the car sped past, its windows tinted so dark she couldn't see the driver's face. Maria's hands shook as she dialed Jake. "They're watching me," she whispered. "We have to finish this." The escalation only made Jake more determined. Together, he and Maria started compiling every detail: names, dates, security footage, staff records. Carter moved fast. Within days, he'd assembled a small, trusted task force. "We need more than evidence," Carter told them. "We need to catch them in the act." The plan was risky, but it was the only way. A sting operation, with Jake and Maria inside the airport as bait, and Rex working alongside the agents. Jake's official suspension meant he wasn't supposed to set foot in the terminal, but Carter cleared the way. Maria disguised herself as a volunteer, wearing the same charity vest as the suspects. Jake dressed in civilian clothes and kept close to the ground. The tension that day was suffocating. The airport, usually a blur of faces and stories, seemed to slow to a crawl. Jake watched every movement, scanning for familiar faces, searching for the tells. The nervous ticks, the secret glances, the way some people just didn't fit. Rex, bandaged but alert, led the way, sniffing for danger with every step. Suddenly, as Maria lingered near the restricted baggage area, Rex jerked his head up, nostrils flaring. He barked, a single, urgent note, and charged toward a group wheeling crates labeled medical supplies. Jake's heart leapt into his throat as Carter and his team moved in. One of the volunteers tried to slip away, disappearing into a maintenance tunnel. Jake ran after him, adrenaline burning, the concrete echoing with his footsteps. Rex stayed at Jake's side, undaunted by the chaos, barking as they turned a corner into the labyrinth beneath the terminal. The chase was brutal. Tight corridors, slick floors, the pounding of his own heart. Jake cornered the suspect near an old cargo elevator, wrestling him to the ground just as Carter and another agent arrived. The man snarled, kicking out, but Rex snapped his jaws just inches from the man's arm, forcing him to freeze. Meanwhile, Maria wasn't safe. As she waited with Carter above ground, a woman in a charity vest approached, her smile brittle. "You shouldn't be here," the woman hissed, stepping too close. But Carter's team was there in seconds, handcuffing the woman before she could make another move. The fallout was immediate and overwhelming. FBI vans rolled up to the terminal, agents swarming the back rooms. Dr. Grant was arrested as she tried to leave in a tinted SUV. Dozens of children were found in hidden compartments of luggage and maintenance areas, dazed but alive. Later that night, Jake sat on his living room floor, bandaging a gash on Rex's paw. The dog licked his hand, whining softly, but his eyes were proud, bright, unbroken. Jake rested his forehead on Rex's head, tears spilling unchecked. "You did it, old boy," he whispered. "You saved them. You saved all of us." Maria called, voice shaking with relief and exhaustion. "We did it," she said, "but I'm still scared." Jake looked at Rex, at the badges, at the pile of evidence now in safe hands. "Me too," he said. "But we did what was right. That's what matters." Outside, the sky was starting to lighten. It was a new day, but Jake knew the scars, on all of them, would take a long time to heal. The day of the sting dawned with the kind of heavy gray sky that made the city feel hushed and tense. At Hartsfield-Jackson, things appeared normal to the untrained eye. Families shuffling through check-in, the hum of flight announcements, the usual blend of anticipation and impatience. But Jake, Maria, Rex, and the FBI team knew everything was different. Every movement felt loaded. Every corner seemed to hide a secret. Jake's skin prickled with the sense that anything could happen. Jake had barely slept, the adrenaline and dread twisting inside him like a live wire. Even Rex, bandaged but determined, was more silent than usual, moving with a fierce, business-like focus. Maria, dressed in her volunteer vest, glanced at Jake as they passed through security. Her jaw was set, her eyes wary. "We stick to the plan," she whispered. "No heroes today." Carter gathered them in a small room near the terminal's heart, the FBI team checking radios and running through last-minute strategy. "We have eyes everywhere," Carter said, voice clipped. "Dr. Grant's charity is moving a shipment this morning. Medical crates, 3 suspects on the inside. We're tracking all of them. You two, he nodded at Jake and Maria, are the triggers. Let Rex do his work, and if anything feels off, you get out. Understood? They nodded. No one wanted to be a martyr, but everyone understood the risks. Out on the concourse, the air felt electric. Jake's heart hammered as he watched families passing by, wondering how many lives would change in the next hour. Rex sniffed the air, his body quivering with anticipation. He led them to the freight elevators, where a group of volunteers in bright vests gathered, loading crates marked medical supplies, fragile. One of them, a nervous-looking man with salt and pepper hair, glanced up when he saw Jake and Maria, eyes narrowing for a split second before he looked away. Rex's ears pricked. He circled the crates, nose twitching, then barked sharply and pawed at a crate on the bottom of the stack. Maria knelt, her voice steady but urgent as she called for the FBI team. "We've got something. North loading dock, near the elevators." The suspects scattered. Two ran toward the security doors. Another tried to disappear into the maze of underground service tunnels. Carter's team moved fast, agents streaming from hidden posts, blocking exits, tackling one suspect by the baggage belts. Jake and Rex chased the second suspect into the tunnels, a warren of narrow halls and dim emergency lights. The air in the tunnels was thick, humid, and laced with the metallic tang of fear. Jake's breath echoed off concrete walls as he sprinted after the fleeing volunteer. Rex raced ahead, barking as the suspect fumbled with a locked door. Jake caught up, grappling with the man, his arms burning from the struggle. Rex lunged, his teeth snapping inches from the man's sleeve, just enough threat to make the man freeze, hands up, eyes wild. Jake cuffed him with shaking hands, adrenaline pulsing through every muscle. Meanwhile, above ground, Maria found herself cornered by Dr. Grant herself. The doctor's eyes, usually warm and professional, were cold now, predator's eyes. "You should have minded your own business," Grant hissed, stepping close. Maria's heart thudded in her chest. But before Grant could act, Carter and two agents appeared, guns drawn, voices thunderous. "Drop it, Dr. Grant! Hands in the air!" Grant's mask slipped, her face twisted with fury and, finally, defeat. With the ringleaders captured, the agents opened the medical crates. The contents twisted every stomach in the room, hidden compartments, supplies masking tranquilizers, forged documents, and, heartbreakingly, terrified children. Some of the kids clung to blankets, blinking in the harsh light, too stunned to speak. Others burst into tears, reaching for the agents with trembling hands. Jake stood by, helpless tears streaming down his face as Rex gently nuzzled a little girl who wouldn't let go of his ear. The sight of Rex, battered and bandaged but still offering comfort, broke what was left of Jake's composure. He dropped to his knees, pulling Rex close, and let himself cry in front of everyone. The rescue was chaos. FBI vans converged on the terminal, agents flooding every corridor, staff and travelers alike ushered away from the scene. Dozens of children were led to safety, wrapped in space blankets, checked by paramedics, clinging to volunteers and each other. Jake found Maria by the emergency doors, tears streaking her face, arms wrapped around a little boy who refused to let go. "I thought we'd lost," Maria whispered, voice trembling. "I thought—" Jake shook his head, voice rough. "Not today. You did it, Maria. We all did." In the final moments, as the dust settled, one last threat reared its head. Dr. Grant, handcuffed and flanked by agents, locked eyes with Jake. "You think this ends here?" She spat, her voice shaking with hate. "You're just a dog chasing shadows." Jake looked at Rex, battered but proud, and smiled through the exhaustion. Maybe. But sometimes the dog is the only one who can see what's really there. As the children were evacuated and the agents made high-profile arrests, Jake realized how much he and Rex had sacrificed. Rex limped heavily, his paw bloodied from the chase, but he refused to leave Jake's side even as the medics insisted on treatment. The bond between them, tested, battered, unbreakable, had carried them both through the fire. As the sun finally broke through the morning haze, painting gold over the runway, Jake crouched by Rex on the tarmac. Maria stood beside them, watching the children board the ambulances, their faces turned toward freedom and the possibility of healing. In that moment, Jake felt both broken and whole, scarred and redeemed. He knew the scars, on himself, on Rex, on Maria and the children, would never fade entirely. But for the first time, there was hope that healing could begin. The news broke before sunrise. FBI busts trafficking ring at Atlanta airport, blared across TV screens, splashed in bold on newspaper headlines, and echoed through every terminal loudspeaker. Reporters crowded the gates, shoving microphones at anyone in uniform, desperate for a glimpse of the so-called heroes. In the center of the storm, Jake felt anything but heroic. The adrenaline of the sting had long since faded. In its place was a bone-deep exhaustion and a haunting sense of guilt that gnawed at him, even as the world outside cheered. Rex lay at Jake's feet in the hospital, his injured paw bandaged tight. Around them, well-wishers from the airport staff shuffled in and out, dropping cards, snacks, and small toys for Rex, who had become, overnight, the mascot of courage and survival. But the room, filled with get-well balloons and chirping monitors, felt strangely silent. Jake stared at the blank TV, replaying the faces of the rescued children over and over in his mind. He couldn't shake the image of those hidden compartments, the terrified eyes, the trembling hands reaching for help. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the children they couldn't save, faces missing from the crowd, names that would never make headlines. Maria came to visit, dark circles under her eyes, her movements slower than usual. She dropped into a chair with a weary sigh. "They want to give us medals," she said, voice flat. "The city council, the governor, even the president's office called." She let out a bitter laugh. "As if that makes any of this easier." Jake managed a tired smile. "I'd trade every medal for one less empty seat at someone's dinner table." Maria nodded, tears welling. "Me too." For the next week, the hospital became a sanctuary for the survivors, and for those who'd fought to save them. Rex's recovery drew a steady stream of visitors. Airport employees, families of the rescued, even airline pilots who dropped by to scratch behind his ears. Jake noticed the way people lingered, drawn to the old dog's gentle presence. There was something healing in the way Rex leaned into every touch, accepting their gratitude with a kind of silent wisdom. Jake, though, struggled to forgive himself. He replayed the sting in his head, questioning every decision. Could they have moved faster? Had they missed any clues? The guilt, sharper now that the danger had passed, threatened to consume him. At night, he'd sit by Rex's side, resting his hand on the dog's flank, whispering all the things he couldn't say out loud. One afternoon, as the rain hammered the hospital windows, a nurse entered with a small, shy girl in tow. She had tangled hair and deep brown eyes, one of the children from the crates. "She's asked to see Rex," the nurse said quietly. The girl approached slowly, clutching a stuffed bear, and knelt beside Rex. At first, she said nothing, just stroked the old shepherd's fur with trembling fingers. Then she leaned close and whispered, "Thank you for finding me." Jake swallowed hard, his chest aching. The girl, her name was Grace, looked up at him, her expression solemn. "Are you his person?" Jake managed a nod, clearing his throat. "Yeah, he's my partner, my best friend." Grace smiled, and for the first time since the rescue, Jake felt a thread of warmth break through the numbness. Rex, sensing the girl's gentle presence, thumped his tail against the hospital blanket and pressed his nose into her lap. Grace visited often over the next few days. She and Rex formed a quiet bond. She'd bring him treats, read him stories, and sometimes just sit by his side in silence. Jake watched the two of them together and felt something shift inside him. The pain didn't disappear, but for a few moments, it eased. Maria stopped by daily too, always bringing something for Rex, a new chew toy, a slice of deli meat, a gentle word. The three of them would sit in the hospital room, talking quietly, or just listening to the rain. "I wish I could take them all home," Maria said one evening, voice breaking as she watched Grace curl up beside Rex. A few weeks later, as Rex grew stronger and the media circus faded, Maria began the process to adopt Grace. The paperwork was complicated, the background checks thorough. But in the end, the courts agreed that Maria, a survivor herself, was the best family the girl could have. The day Maria brought Grace home was filled with laughter and tears. Jake stood in the doorway, watching as Grace clung to Maria's hand, her other arm wrapped around Rex's neck. Sometimes being a hero meant learning to live with the scars. Jake and Maria both struggled with nightmares, flashbacks, the guilt of survival. But slowly, with therapy, long walks, and the steady presence of Rex, they found their footing again. Jake was back at the airport a month later when he bumped into Pam from the information desk. She handed him a stack of cards made by the rescued children, each one covered in hand-drawn hearts and paw prints. "You and that dog, you saved a lot of lives," Pam whispered, squeezing his arm. Jake blinked away tears as he flipped through the cards. He thought about everything they'd lost, everything they'd gained, and realized that hope, no matter how fragile, could always be found in the most unexpected places. That night, Jake visited Maria and Grace at their apartment. Rex sprawled across the living room rug, head on Grace's lap. The three of them shared pizza and stories, letting laughter ring out against the shadows that lingered at the edges of their memories. For the first time in a long time, Jake felt the possibility of peace. The weeks after the sting brought a tidal wave of change, not just for Jake and Maria, but for the entire airport. The story of the rescue echoed far beyond Atlanta. News anchors spoke about Rex's heroics. Parents clung tighter to their children, and airports across the country scrambled to review their own protocols. What Jake and Maria had started became a movement, a wake-up call for the entire industry. Yet even as the world called them heroes, Jake found that healing was not so simple. He watched planes take off from the window of his small office, the runways stretching out toward an uncertain future. Rex lay on the floor, his breathing slow and even, gray fur shining in the morning light. Jake was designing a new program, something he'd pitched to the airport board and now poured himself into: trauma training for K-9 units and their handlers. It wasn't just about sniffing out contraband anymore. After everything they'd seen, Jake knew firsthand how deeply a dog could sense human pain. The anxiety in a child's heartbeat, the tremor in a frightened parent's voice. He met with behaviorists and therapists, building a program where dogs like Rex could help not only protect, but heal. It's not just about what they smell, Jake explained in a presentation to the board. It's about what they feel. Our dogs know when something's wrong, sometimes before we do. Let's listen to them. At first, some executives were skeptical, but when Rex padded into the meeting, limping but dignified, and laid his head in a little boy's lap, one of the children rescued from Dr. Grant's ring, the room went silent. Eyes teared up, jaws softened, and suddenly, change felt possible. Maria and Jake met often for coffee between shifts. She was still working through the emotional fallout, and they'd both started attending therapy sessions together. Sometimes they talked about the sting, picking apart the moments that haunted their dreams. Other times, they sat in silence, sipping their drinks, letting the comfort of shared company say everything that needed to be said. Grace was thriving in Maria's care. The once timid girl was blossoming. She started drawing again, filling Maria's fridge with pictures of Rex as a superhero, Jake as a smiling policeman, and herself in a bright pink dress. Maria enrolled her in a new school, took her to therapy, and every week they visited Rex, who greeted Grace like family each time. For Jake, the hardest work was repairing his relationship with Anne. She'd kept her distance in the chaos that followed the rescue, unsure where her place was in his life anymore. One rainy evening, Jake finally sat with her on their back porch, Rex curled at his feet. "I got lost in it," Jake admitted quietly, voice raw. "I couldn't let go of what happened to my sister, and I was scared I'd fail again." Anne reached for his hand, her touch warm. "You never failed me, Jake, or anyone. You just forgot to come home." Tears slid down Jake's cheeks as he realized how much pain he'd buried, how desperately he needed to let it out. They talked long into the night, rebuilding trust word by word, until Anne leaned her head on his shoulder, and Jake knew he was no longer alone. The airport changed, too. After the FBI investigation, new policies swept through. Stricter background checks, surveillance upgrades, and a zero-tolerance policy for any charity not thoroughly vetted. Jake helped write the handbook, insisting on one crucial rule: no child, no matter how lost or scared, would ever be left alone. The airport installed bright, color-coded paths for kids, staffed dedicated child welfare agents, and, inspired by Rex, brought on more therapy dogs. Rex, though technically retired, became something of a celebrity. He visited schools and hospitals with Jake, comforting kids who'd suffered trauma, lying patiently as little hands stroked his fur. Once, during a visit to a children's hospital, Rex sensed a boy having a panic attack and gently nudged the child until the anxiety passed. Jake watched, humbled by the old dog's instinct, grateful beyond words. Maria's journey wasn't easy either. She faced her share of nightmares, flashbacks to the sting, the look in Dr. Grant's eyes, the shadows that crept into her dreams. Therapy helped, but so did Grace's laughter and the small routines of daily life. Maria found a support group for parents of missing children, sharing her story and listening to others who'd carried pain for years. What does justice really mean? Jake asked himself this question over and over. Was it locking up the bad guys? Or was it helping people learn to trust again? Was it found in the courtroom? Or in the quiet moments when a child dared to smile again? One afternoon, the airport held a ceremony to honor Rex. The mayor gave a speech, the news cameras flashed, and Jake stood by his partner, his hand resting on Rex's broad shoulders. When it was Jake's turn to speak, he looked at the crowd, officials, co-workers, families, even some of the rescued children, and felt the emotion rise in his chest. "I spent most of my life believing that being strong meant keeping your guard up," Jake said. "But Rex taught me that real strength is letting yourself care, even when it hurts. That's what saved those kids. Not just courage, but compassion." As the ceremony ended, Anne and Maria joined him on stage. Grace ran up and hugged Rex around the neck, giggling as the dog licked her cheek. Jake smiled through his tears. In that moment, surrounded by the people he loved and the lives he'd helped change, he realized that hope was not just possible, it was inevitable. And as the sun set behind the airport, casting long golden shadows across the runway, Jake knew they'd finally found a way forward. After everything they'd lost, they were building something new. A family, a future, and a reason to believe in second chances. Months slipped by in the gentle way seasons change. A little more sunlight on the porch each morning, a bit of green on the trees, laughter returning to rooms once heavy with shadows. The airport moved forward, but Jake, Maria, Rex, and Grace found themselves stepping into a new chapter, each day colored by what they had endured and by the possibility of peace. Rex, officially retired, spent most mornings sprawled on the porch of Jake's modest home outside Atlanta. His limp had eased with rest, though scars, some visible, others hidden, remained. He chased squirrels with the same youthful spirit he'd shown years ago, but he tired faster, and in the afternoons, he preferred to doze in the sun, ears twitching to the sound of the breeze. Jake would watch him sometimes, a mug of coffee warming his hands, marveling at how life had changed. He'd once thought he was destined to live inside his wounds. Now he understood what it meant to heal, not to forget, but to move forward. On weekends, Maria and Grace would visit, the girl racing across the field with Rex at her side, both of them chasing butterflies and dreams. Maria, always careful not to let her worries take root, smiled more now. She and Jake would sit on the back steps, sharing stories, memories, and quiet moments. Sometimes Grace would curl up next to them, head on Maria's shoulder, her eyes bright with the certainty of safety. One Saturday in early spring, Jake set up a picnic by the lake that bordered his property, a tradition they'd all come to cherish. The sun was soft and golden, dappling the water with shimmering light. Anne joined them, her hand resting comfortably in Jake's. Old wounds between them had softened, replaced with a quiet gratitude. It was as if time itself had paused, allowing them a brief moment untouched by loss or fear. Rex lay in the grass, tail thumping lazily, eyes drifting closed as Grace whispered secrets into his ear. Maria unpacked sandwiches and lemonade, and Jake spread out a blanket, listening to the joyful noise of ducks splashing in the reeds. As they ate, Grace asked the question that had lingered unspoken between them. Will the bad people ever come back? Her voice was small, uncertain. The adults exchanged a glance, each of them understanding the weight behind her words. Maria wrapped an arm around Grace's shoulders. No one can promise you bad things will never happen again, she said gently. But you're not alone anymore. You have all of us, and we'll keep you safe. Jake nodded, voice warm. That's what families do, Grace. We look out for each other, and you're family now. Grace seemed to consider this, then smiled, a smile so wide and genuine that Jake felt his chest ache with hope. The afternoon drifted on, easy and peaceful. After lunch, Grace waded into the lake, Rex splashing alongside her, both of them shrieking with laughter when a frog startled them from the reeds. Maria and Jake watched, the simple happiness of the moment stitching something back together in each of their hearts. Later, as the sun dipped low and fireflies sparked along the shoreline, Jake built a small fire. They gathered around, toasting marshmallows, sharing stories. Jake told Grace about his sister, the pain, the loss, and how, because of Rex and Maria, he'd finally learned to let go of the guilt. "It doesn't mean I stopped loving her," Jake said softly. "It means I learned to live again, and to love the people who are here with me now." Grace snuggled closer to Maria, who wiped away a tear. "You saved me, you know," Grace whispered. "You and Rex. You gave me a home." Maria's voice shook. "You gave me one too, Grace. You brought light back into my world." Rex, sensing the emotion, pressed his head into Jake's lap, letting out a satisfied sigh. The group fell into a comfortable silence, watching the stars blink into view overhead. For the first time in a long time, the silence wasn't heavy or haunted. It was full of promise, of futures unwritten. As the fire died down, Jake looked at his little makeshift family. He thought about everything they'd endured. The darkness, the fear, the nights spent wondering if hope was even possible. And now, here they were. A circle of souls bound not just by pain, but by healing, by kindness, by the simple courage it takes to care for one another. He looked at Grace, who had survived what no child ever should. He looked at Maria, whose loss had nearly broken her, but who had chosen love over despair. He looked at Anne, who had forgiven him and opened her heart again. And he looked at Rex, the dog who had seen what no one else would, who had led him through the shadows and into the light. "If you ever doubt the power of one good soul," Jake said quietly, "just remember Rex. One dog changed everything." Sometimes the smallest act of love ripples out farther than we ever imagine. They stayed there until the stars brightened and the lake stilled, each of them finding comfort in the presence of the others. Rex rested his head in Jake's lap, eyes half closed, tail flicking softly in the night air. Jake stroked the dog's scarred fur, whispering, "Thank you, old friend, for everything." And as the moon rose high above the trees, their laughter and gentle voices drifted across the water, a promise that, after so much loss, they had found home. If this story touched you, consider supporting animal rescues and organizations fighting child trafficking. Every life matters, and every act counts. Please like and follow for more stories of hope and courage.